Thank you. First of all, thanks to Jim, Johnny, Yoko. You're around here somewhere, but it's an honor to be here. It's been a real enjoyable time. There's two themes to my talk, I think. The first theme is the importance of good administrators. You know, we have a big university, and not all our bosses are good, but some of our administrators are very good. And I've been blessed. I've been very lucky to be around some administrators who've had a vision of change and who have actually really cared about freshmen or, first-year education. The second theme is the importance of research in teaching and learning, of good research in teaching and learning, and how that can promote change. But we're going to start, get my clicker going here, with kind of the history of freshman education at large universities. And I think many of you are aware that, the freshman year, the first year at a big university like the University of Minnesota, you often find yourself in an auditorium. So you take freshman biology with 900 other students. And the history of this goes back to England, it goes back to Australia, it goes back to many countries, and I imagine it's here too, that when you are a new student, you are one of a big number. And we, as professors, know how to teach in this room. We know how to stand in front and talk about mitochondria. We can stand in front and talk about parameciums or respiration, and we can talk. We can lecture for hours and hours, and it's pretty easy and it's comfortable. And on the other side, our administrators have become very comfortable with the amount of money, the tuition revenue that we generate in these classrooms. And something I tell my students now, because I'm tenured, I can tell them this. We need you in a large auditorium to generate lots of revenue for our research. We need the money that we generate in these rooms to fund small upper division classes, because it's when you get to your junior and senior year, you have 10 students in a room, but your freshman year you have 900. I think the largest I've heard in the United States for freshman biology is 1,200 students in one room. And then just think of the tuition revenue you generate. So there's history to science education as well. And so when I left high school teaching and nursing education, I went back to the University of Minnesota, and I knew I liked the sciences, but I also really liked teaching and learning. And I kind of had a dual career, in terms of a graduate student, in that I took physiology classes, I took evolution classes, but I was also taking classes in the College of Education. And something that really confused me as a practicing teacher was the research in science education. And we have these journals. This is a very prestigious journal, the Journal of Research in Science Teaching, or JERST. And JERST is a very dense journal. And I went to the conferences of JERST, and there weren't any teachers there. There was education psychologists. There were, it was cognitive science. And the teachers that I knew, it's just like, hey, do you read JERST? No. Look at this. This is, excuse it, but this is useless to me. This has nothing to do with what I do on a day-to-day basis in my classroom. It was a very theoretical journal. Here's another journal, International Journal of Science Education, another prestigious journal. But not very useful to everyday science teachers. And there got to be a kind of a gap. It's just like there's the researchers, and then there's the people who teach on a regular basis, and they didn't talk. Okay, so these are two pictures of some very, very good people. On the left is the Jensen brothers. And the Jensen brothers at the University of Minnesota did research in cooperative learning. And David Jensen on the left is an education psychologist. And he's very introverted and shy, but he loves to write. He likes to write articles that are 40, 80 pages long. And on the right up there is Roger. And Roger is a classic elementary school teacher. He can make you feel comfortable and talk, and these two had their careers in cooperative group learning. And they just like ruled the world in the world of research and cooperative group learning. They're big names. And this is Bob Bruininks. And Bob Bruininks is a childhood psychologist, child psychologist. And he became an administrator at the University of Minnesota. And he rose up to president. He was the president of the whole university. And these, three are all friends. They hang out together and eat and things. And Bob Bruininks, when he was kind of ending his tenure as president, he went to David and Roger and just said, what can I do? What can I do to really change things up for teaching and learning at the University of Minnesota? And there was talk back and forth. And it's just like, what do we do? What do we do? And what they did was this. Bob Bruininks, administrators and presidents are very powerful. And he said, I want a whole building dedicated to active learning, to students doing something other than sitting in a lecture hall, something where students can get more actively engaged in their learning. And this you kind of recognize as an active learning room now. It's got round seats. And here's an aerial view. This is where the teacher stands, and students look at each other. Now, this is unique. This is very unique, because like in a lecture hall like this, you're all looking at me. If I said turn to your neighbor, you kind of have to turn and contort yourself and twist. But in this environment, students don't look at you. They're looking at each other. And it's just like, is this a classroom? Yes, this is a classroom. And coming from a high school environment, the desks are movable. We can move desks around and arrange them, and we can make use of that flexibility. And in this room, they're fixed, but at least they're looking at each other. And I think I have a date back here, 2010. This is, when students first walked into here in 2010, it was like, what's going to happen here? What are we going to do in this room? How are you going to lecture in this room? And the instructors also, it's just like, what do we do in this room? How do you run a class? How do you teach, and here's my question, how do you teach physiology in a room with round tables? That was a puzzle. Because I knew David and Roger, I rose my hand quickly and said, I want to teach there. I want to work in an active learning classroom. I had a problem though. I didn't know what I was doing. There's the question. That was me. And here's a key line. It took a few years. This is not easy. It took a few years for me to figure out how to use the room. That's a big deal. This is not an easy transition. To move from a lecturer to a person who runs an active learning classroom takes work. Now, the building opened in 2010, and here's 3 papers that I wrote that kind of all went to one research journal. And I want you to look at the date, 2010, 2016. There's 6 years. And look at this. First attempts at teaching human anatomy and physiology in an active learning classroom. It's not a positive paper. There were lots of frustrating days. There were lots of days where the teachers are just, the students are going, I don't get what you're doing here. It's just like, you don't have your act together. But slowly started to figure a few things out. And it really came down to 2 things. There was instruction. How do you teach in this classroom? And how do you manage round tables? How do you manage student discussions? But then what really became clear is you need curriculum. And curriculum is the materials that students used to learn human physiology. I had nothing. I had no materials. There was nobody out there making materials for the active learning classroom for anatomy and physiology. I had some friends who did some general biology stuff, and it's just like, But here's the ticket for me. My boss enabled me to go to a POGIL workshop. And POGIL stands for Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning, which is a curriculum method. It's a teaching and learning method that was kind of developed in chemistry. But the chemists, use it to teach chemistry, and I could quickly see this will work for physiology. I can use this POGL method to develop curriculum. I can use it to write curriculum. And the instructional strategies were pretty easy for me. I knew how to run cooperative learning groups. And so that was kind of second nature. But writing this curriculum, still doing it today. I'm still writing more and more curriculum. But, in 2019 now, I have more curriculum than I can use. Now I'm at a point where it's like, what do I drop? What do I get rid of? I have good curriculum for almost every day. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to stop writing it. For in 2010, if you walked around that building in 2010, most of the rooms were empty. Most of the professors were just like, I'm not going to teach in there. I don't want to change. They didn't want to teach their classes in the active learning classroom. It's just like they didn't do that. But what happened? Well, does anybody know these people? I think I talked to one person yesterday who was talking, hey, I know Sue Wick. This is Sue Wick, and that's Robin Wright. And these are biologists. And they looked at this active learning classroom, and they were talking to their peers, and they said, we need to move all of our freshman biology to active learning classrooms. And she's a very powerful administrator in terms of a dean, and she was able to get things done. And to go forward to all the biology faculty members and say, our major's biology is not going to be lecture anymore. We're going to move it to active learning. She has quite a few enemies. Because she basically said, no, you're not going to lecture to the freshmen anymore. And there were a lot of faculty members who were like, harumph. What do you mean I'm not a good teacher? No, I'm not saying you're not a good lecturer, but our students are going to be in active learning classrooms. And you're not going to be in that room if all you're going to do is lecture. So that made her quite a few enemies. She works in Washington now, and it was kind of like, I've burned a lot of bridges, and she admits it. It's just like, yeah, but she had to. And Sue is my boss now in many ways, and that, and she's just like, this is how we teach. No, you can do it that way if you want, but you're not going to be in this department. And they invited me to this new department. Look at this name, Biology, Teaching, and Learning. That's the name of our department. We focus on teaching and learning biology. We're a research department in teaching and learning in the College of Biology. And that's pretty new. And here's another new thing. Society for the Advancement of Biology, Education, Research. Robin and Sue were both kind of big in getting a whole new organization focused to classroom teaching and learning for biology. It's a long way away from that JURST journal that was kind of for the education psychology people. This journal, the journal that they kind of put together, is useful to day-to-day biology teachers. All right, so something that's really, happened in the last 10, 15 years, improved education research done by science educators. And so biologists are doing classroom research now. It's not education psychologists, it's biologists, it's chemists, it's physicists who are actually kind of taking the reins and saying, I'm going to do research on teaching and learning. That's new. And then here's some really big articles kind of in the area of biology, teaching, and learning. Freeman is a textbook author, and this is probably the most cited article in all of biology, teaching, and learning. And it basically, read the title, Active Learning Increases Student Performance Across STEM Disciplines. That's a very powerful article. And it basically says, active learning, it helps students do better. And I'm going to be a little bit more picky. Historically, the top students are always your top students. They're always going to succeed, no matter what you do. Lecture to them, active learning, just say, here's the book, go home and read it. They're going to succeed. The very best and brightest always succeed. But the B's and the C and even the D students, they really benefit. And students who are not English speakers, the English as a second language, do better. And students who struggle do better. And that's really the power of kind of the active learning stuff is you don't have as many people dropping the class. More people succeed. And then concept inventories. The notion of how do you measure learning? It's a really messy science. How do you measure learning? And concept inventories are kind of a valid step towards this student is learning more than that student. And concept inventories are found in many different disciplines. And Jenny is a friend of mine, and she's worked really hard developing one on the physiological concept of homeostasis. But she's one of many people who have worked to develop concept inventories. But it's kind of like the first step in becoming an education researcher in terms of classroom research. Your test scores are not valid. You can't use your test grades to say, well, my students are doing better this semester than last semester. You can kind of take it and kind of look at it, but you can't really publish it and say this is good data. But if you're using a concept inventory to measure student gains, that's good research. Let's see here. Okay. Now, there's 2 new journals even out. I shouldn't say 2, there's many journals. There's used to be the Journal of Research and Science Teaching, and that's still around. That's still a powerful journal, and the education psychologists are still using this. But this is Life Science Education, and this is about 10 years old now. And this is a journal for classroom biology teachers. And this one, people who teach freshman biology, they look at this, they read this, and they see what's new. And then there's an older journal, Chemical Education. Chemistry is a little bit further beyond. They're a little bit more mature than biology. And then physicists are the best. Physics education is farther along than chemistry. Chemistry is farther along than biology. But these are new journals, and they're starting to get respect. It used to be if a biologist published an education journal, it was like, well, that's nice, but it's not important. I'm going to say that again. That's a nice little article, but it's not going to get you tenure. Now, Life Science Education, yeah, that's starting to be a rigorous journal. And getting an article in there, the other faculty members are saying, good for you. And here's a phrase that we use a lot. This one counts. That's a nice publication, but it doesn't count. This one, they're starting to count. And so they're starting to ramp up in terms of having a place in academia. So there's also, a push by policy documents. Washington, D.C. has all these big organizations of scientists, and they come out with policy documents that recommend how should freshmen be taught, how should biology be taught. And these are 2 big ones, Vision and Change and NGSS, Next Generation Science Standards. And in these 2 and in almost all of them, they all say the same thing. Cut down lecture. Don't lecture so much. Students who are learning science need to be involved in science. They need to be doing stuff. They need to be having conversation. But lecture may be old. It may be very profitable for raising tuition money, but it's not very good at helping students learn. And so we're getting good data from journals. We're getting recommendation from policy documents. But still, there's resistance. There's still people who are going, harumph, I'm going to lecture. I'm going to lecture. Why? Well, why is there the resistance? I'm going to come up with 3. You could probably come up with others. But here are the big 3 for me. There is still skepticism to classroom research. There's still a lot of skepticism. Is that stuff any good? It's pretty soft. It's just, I'm not sure if I believe it. And this picture right here, I like talking about this. Lead to gold. Was there a time that chemists were talking about trying to change lead to gold? Does that sound like the history of chemistry? And if you today as a chemist tried to publish an article on changing lead to gold, would you be published? Probably not going to go very far. But you learned something. But education research in some ways is at a stage where we're still trying to change lead to gold. We don't know what works. We don't know what doesn't. We're starting to get a clue, but we're still very young. The early days of chemistry, this was chemistry. Now it's not. in the early days of education, we're trying to figure out things, and we're still a young science. And you could even argue, is classroom research a science? And we're starting, but we're kind of at the stage of, well, there's a lot of noise here, but we're starting to get some signal too. We're starting to know a few things, like the Freeman article. We know active learning is better than lecture, but we have a long way to go. We're still young. Research, oh, this is a big one. Research professors are not rewarded for improved teaching. And I don't know about other countries, but in the University of Minnesota and almost every school in the United States, research professors are not rewarded for quality teaching. You have to kick out research articles, you have to get grants. In the classroom teaching, and I think many of you know this, for like a biochemist or a neuroscientist, the easiest thing to do is lecture. You grab a bunch of PowerPoint slides, you go in and you show them, and you just talk about what you know. And then you can just, close your laptop, walk away, and go back to your lab and get back to what really counts, which is your research. But, we've got this system, and here's what I think this is from Brave New World. No, it's Animal Farm. Teaching and research are equal, but research is more equal than teaching. I think that's Animal Farm. But, that's kind of, we have these contracts that say we have, 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% service. Service means nothing. We all know that. But then, it's supposed to be equal. They're not equal. And I'm quite overt looking at new faculty and just saying, no, it's research. This is a research university. We focus on research. You can research classroom science, classroom teaching and learning. That's starting to be respectable. But you got to publish. This is kind of a fun saying. You teach the way you've been taught. You teach the way you've been taught. And there's a lot of lectures out there in our past that we've listened to. And look at me. I'm a biologist. Must be a good way to teach other biologists. And so it's just the momentum. You learned in sitting in a seat, and now I'm in front, but I'm very comfortable up here, and I'm going to lecture. And it was good for me, so it's got to be good for you. To change is difficult. That's a difficult process. What can be done for this resistance? What can we do? And just a couple suggestions, these are kind of obvious. Rewards for trying new teaching strategies. Do you have a reward system for trying something new? And from a personal standpoint, a lot of people who lecture will try active learning for a day and say, well, that didn't work. One day, it's just like, well, that didn't work. It's just like, no, it's going to take more than a day. It's going to take more than a year. It took me probably 4 years to get the hang of it. And I have a lot of background in teaching and learning. I was a high school teacher. I've been doing this a long time. And it took me a long time to figure out how to run an active learning classroom. So it's just patience. Build active learning classrooms. So if you were in this room and you wanted to run in an active learning classroom or kind of do active learning in here, you probably could. You could take apart the chairs and get them turned, but it's not a natural thing to do in here. If you have a room where the rooms, the round tables, it's a lot easier. This is tough. Try something new? What? I'm very comfortable with what I'm doing. Try something new. But I think this is true around the world. Teachers get paid the same whether they use new practices or old practices. What's the motivation for trying something new? Well, I work with a lot of experienced high school teachers, and they get burned out. It's just like, well, I've been lecturing for a long time. I want, what else can I do? And it's just like, oh, this is giving me new life. I've got a new way to run a classroom now. This is fun. So one of the motivations for trying something new is boredom. It's just like, I've been doing this for a long time. Let me try something. But then the other one, it kind of gets back to, I'm rewarded for my research. Why should I put energy into trying something new and developing something new when I'm not rewarded for it? And then this is a big one. It's like yesterday's Pogo workshop. We had a Pogo workshop. People show up. Hey, try something. Hey, maybe it'll work, might not, but just, hey, give it a shot. And now here's something more and more in the United States. I can't speak for Japan, but in the United States, active learning, group learning, inquiry learning, they're doing it in the middle schools and the high schools. It's in the middle schools and the high schools. And more, they walk into my room, they know what to do. They know the expectations. And so the students are expecting it. It's just like, how come the only thing we're doing in this class is lecture? So they don't revolt, but it's just like, we want this active learning stuff. This is how we learn. All right, this is a good concluding slide. Filters and pumps. Filters and pumps. And this is a good analogy for teaching. But in the big, huge lecture classrooms, in biology, we used to think we want to select. We want to filter out the best and the brightest and call them biology majors. We only want the best and the brightest. The rest, they can pick some other area. We want the best. But we know now, kind of in the history of, who becomes biology majors, we need to do better. We need to do better. We need a more diverse population of biology majors. And we were picking pretty much homogeneous, populations to come into biology majors. And we used to kind of just say, we're filters. Freshman bio, we filter out the weak. Now, we want to be pumps. We want to get people excited about biology. We want to say, hey, give this a shot and see if you like it, and we're going to help you do it. We're going to push the numbers up instead of, winnow it down, get fewer. But we know this. This is a great filter. The big lecture environments, we can filter out the weak. We're starting to view active learning rooms, and this is a new room for health sciences that's proposed at the university. This is what a new classroom looks like at the University of Minnesota. We want these to become pumps to say, I want to go learn physiology at the University of Minnesota because then I can do active learning and I can go right into the medical school and they're going to do active learning, and we know this is a better way to learn. But this, has history. It's not going to go away quickly. We still have lots of lecture halls at the University of Minnesota, and they're still used. But our active learning classrooms, we have a full house now. It's just like if you want to get in there, there's a waiting list to get in there. So we're making good strides. All right, I think that's my last slide, but I got this last one. This is kind of a bonus slide. Dee Silverthorne is a physiologist and friend of mine, and she wrote an article way back, 2006, over 10, 15 years now. But this article is brilliant. It's difficult to change the way we teach. Lessons learned from as an NSF project. But way back when, Dee tried to get active learning before the rooms were arranged, and it was just a disaster of a grant for her. And then we had teachers that were just about crying. My students hate me. My administrators hate me. Everybody, and just like, what do? You go back to lecture. Go back to lecture. And then Dee says this was a failed grant, but this paper is wonderful because it shows, it talks about the resistance there is. And that resistance is less, but it's still there for many traditional schools. All right, I think I'm done. I will entertain questions. Johnny, or...